Hi guys, it's Charlie here from the knitedit, and this is my first knitting podcast, my first foray into the world of podcasting. I thought it'd be really fun to just do a little video sort of telling everyone about my story, about my kind of career, how I ended up sort of where I am, how I started my own business, how my career kind of took me all over the world, and what it takes to sort of be a knitting designer sort of in the industry. Yeah, so like if any of you are thinking of doing that with your career, or you'd like to like follow my path, I thought it would be really helpful to just have somebody who has the experience, because I didn't have that when I was kind of choosing my career. I just sort of had to make the mistakes for myself. So hopefully my story will be either like entertaining or maybe help you. I mean, first of all, welcome to my little knitting corner. This is where I like run my business from, essentially. I just sit here all day knitting, which is, comfy and cozy and cute, and I love it. I live in Nottingham in the UK, like out in the suburbs. So, I have a little garden, it's like super quiet, and I just love living my little cottagecore fantasy. um, First things first, I'm wearing a Jasper jumper, one of my designs. I think it's like the second last pattern I released. This is the first pattern I ever did in the round. And I think before I ever knitted this pattern, like I don't think I'd ever knitted anything in the round before, apart from like a tube skirt. So it was like a whole learning experience to actually knit a sweater in the round and, design the raglan. But I loved it. Like I'm such a convert to knitting in the round now. It's my new favourite thing. Can't go back to the seaming life. But yeah, so if you want to check out the pattern, I'll have a link in the description down below so that you can get one for yourself. And it contains all the instructions on how to like do all of the colour mixing and how to get the kind of mould effect. And yeah, I mean, shall I get into my career? Shall I do it? Shall I tell my truth? I when I was 16 in the UK, we choose our A levels, which I don't know what the equivalent would be abroad. But yeah, from ages 16 to 18, before we go to like university or college, we do our A levels. And my school was like very academic. And I think I always knew I wanted to do something creative, but I felt kind of pressured into doing something academic because that was sort of what was expected and what the faculty of the school like kind of expected and pressured us into, I guess. So for the longest time I wanted to be a dentist, which is so wild because I can't even imagine being a dentist now. Like I couldn't imagine anything more different to what I actually do now. So for my A-level choices, you pick like 3 or 4 subjects, right? And I chose biology, chemistry, and art. Because I was like, if I just keep the art, like at least I'll be able to have fun while I'm, busting my brain doing these really academic, sciencey subjects. So yeah, did the first year of my A-levels, and like bombed really hard on the biology and chemistry, and kind of realised I was not going to be able to get the grades that I needed to be a dentist, which godsend, because imagine if I had actually done that. So yeah, but then I was doing really well in art, and I was always like very interested in fashion. Like my whole life I've loved like expressing myself through like weird little outfits, and I'd always been a knitter. My mum and nan taught me to knit when I was a kid, so I'd always been into like knitting and crocheting myself little accessories, and I was just like a really crafty, kooky little fashion girl. And my art teacher one day was sort of like, you're going to be a designer one day. like, look at the outfits that you wear, look at the way you put clothes together, like, you're gonna be a designer one day. And I was like 17, and that was the first time anyone had ever kind of said that I could do something creative, I guess. Like, I knew people had creative jobs, but it had never occurred to me that I could do something creative, because I'd been in this like really academic institution my whole life, my whole school life. And yeah, after that, it was like a little switch flipped in my head, and I just sort of had this confidence in myself that I could go on to do something creative. So all it took was like that one person to kind of sit me down and just be like, look, you can do these things. So that was great. Like, I'll always thank him for that. He was such a great teacher, and he sort of instilled that confidence in me. And then I chose to do what we call in the UK like an art foundation, which is like a sort of another year in college after your A levels, sort of before you go to university. It's sort of like an in-between year where if you want to do a creative subject, it gives you just a year to sort of explore that and find out what you want to do. So yeah, I ended up doing my art foundation in Nottingham, because I grew up in a little town just outside of Nottingham. So Nottingham was like the closest big city where you could like go to a decent college that had good facilities and a good reputation for art. And I think I just went into it with an open mind. I remember just thinking, oh, I want to do something maybe vaguely textiles, fashion based. I don't really know what yet. I was also kind of interested in interior design at the time as well, because my mum had been an interior designer when I was growing up, and I'd sort of seen her do that and thought that might be an option. So yeah, I just sort of went in thinking, I'm gonna take some time to like explore whatever creative things I could possibly do for my career. And I just ended up knitting everything. It was kind of a joke. Like, they give you all of these open-ended projects to do with like a vague brief or like a vague point of inspiration, to sort of get you exploring whatever you'd want to explore, get you exploring all of the different disciplines and the different mediums. And I literally just knitted something for every outcome. It's actually funny looking back, and I didn't even put it together in my mind. I was just like, oh yeah, like this brief, like I could knit a chair, or I could knit a person, or I could knit shoes, or I can knit an interiors piece. Like, every single brief that we had, I was just like, knit, knit, knit. So yeah, I ended up being put into the group that was sort of textiles, decorative arts, that sort of interest. And when it came to sort of applying for universities, it didn't occur to me to sort of narrow it down so much to knitting exactly. I was just thinking generally textile design. So I ended up applying for lots of universities for like textile design. I think I applied to like one course at Brighton that was like textiles for fashion design. So it was kind of doing textiles specifically for clothing and fashion, and learning how to make clothes as well, which probably would have been a really great course for me, to be honest. I would have probably loved that. But again, it took one of my tutors saying to me like, Charlie, you are knitting everything, like maybe you'd like to apply to this course at Nottingham Trent that is fashion knitwear design. And I think at the time it was the only course in the country to do knitwear design. I think now there's a couple in London. I think there's one at Central St Martin's. And I looked it up, and I think I got like a brochure, like back in the olden days when you would like order a brochure through the mail. This is like 2011 when I was at college, right? So yeah, I like got this brochure, and I was just like amazed. I was just looking through it, and all of the pictures of the things that people had knitted and the things people had made, and all of the blurb about the course, it just like lit up my brain, and I instantly knew like I need to do this course. Like, this is for me. I am gonna be like a knitwear designer. and I went to an interview at Nottingham Trent, and I remember I just felt like super cocky. I was like, oh, my portfolio is like perfect for this, because everything was tailored towards knitting. I'd done like hand knitting projects, I'd done crochet, I'd done things on the machine. um, I'd literally like made my own yarns out of t-shirts, the kind of stuff you do when you're at college, when you're like, do big crazy things. And I had this great portfolio that was just full of like super creative knitted projects. And I think I just went in thinking like, I'm gonna get this. And yeah, like my interview was really, really, like, it went well. I remembered sort of engaging my interviewers in conversation and sort of asking them questions like, what do you prefer, knit or crochet? And I think they were kind of amazed that somebody would ask them that, because I don't know if they were used to like being asked outright about like their preferences. And we ended up just having like a conversation about the virtues of knitting versus crochet. And yeah, it was just like fun. I felt like I would just get along really well with them, and like the course was perfect for what I wanted to do. And yeah, after the interview, after a few weeks, I found out that I received an unconditional offer, which means that you can sort of go no matter how you do in your course. I think you get the offer sometime around the start of the year, maybe like the springtime, and then you start in the September, obviously. So I got that offer, and I still had the last few months of college to sort of do my final project. And I ended up focusing on nostalgia and sort of childhood, and I made all these little dresses that were kind of based on childhood dreams that I'd had, or like figures from my childhood, that sort of thing. I based it on like My Little Pony, and like the 90s version of My Little Pony, and not like the creepy new one. And A Little Mermaid, because those were sort of my favourite things growing up. So yeah, that was super fun. It's not necessarily something I would do anymore, but I was really proud of it at the time, and I loved like the creativity it afforded me, because they essentially just give you like free range, just do whatever you want, and give you all that space and the time that's just so important for that creative process. So I finished up at college, and after that summer I started at Nottingham Trent University. And it was like such a huge learning curve, because I think I'd imagined that I'd be able to get away with, hand knitting and just doing things in a very tactile, handmade way, when really the way that the course is set up is that you have to learn how to use all of the different machines. So they have like the Dubier machines, and like hand flat domestic knitting machines, and they also have industrial knitting machines that you need to program on a computer, and they knit the pieces automatically. So that was like a huge learning curve. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd used like a little hand flat machine at college, but yeah, like Dubiers are a whole different beast, and quite honestly, like I never really got on very well with them. It was quite counterintuitive to my process as a designer, which is super like tactile and hands-on. It felt very like counter to that, to do things by machine. But I mean, I still enjoyed it. I still like relished learning something new, but I think in the back of my mind the whole time I was just like, this is probably not my kind of thing. But yeah, I still like went for it with all I could and tried to learn how to do the different techniques, but I was never really like a very technical knitter. I was much more like, let's try and manipulate these things by hand. Let's do embroidery. Let's do some applique. Let's like add in something after it comes off the machine. I loved all of that. And I loved like treating fabrics after they came off the machine to like see if I could get any textures or get any, you know, colours, dyes, that sort of thing. I was never going to be one of those girlies that like sat at the DBA for like 12 hours doing an intricate cable. That was just not me. I was going to be like, okay, let's like knit something really fast and do all the fun stuff with it afterwards, to make it interesting. I was always the one that was like embroidering or, you know, doing something on the linker to make it look like it had an interesting stitch pattern. That was just my vibe. And then, yeah, you do your 2 years of university to sort of give you a solid skill set. And then our 3rd year was, we had the opportunity to go and do a year in industry and then come back and graduate in our 4th year. So obviously I was like, yes, love this. I want to get a job. I want to do this for real. And I think even when I was at college, I had read in the little brochure for the course that they had a industry link in Hong Kong and that people had done their placement years in Hong Kong. And even at the time, I was like, oh, that sounds really fun. That sounds like something I want to do. So I applied for the Hong Kong internship. It's with a company called Brilliant Global, which is owned by Lian Feng, which is like a huge, you know, fashion supplier in Hong Kong and China. And, you know, all over the world as well, but that's where they're kind of based. That's where they started. And it was, I think they're called something different now. I think they're called like Cobalt now. But yeah, they were based in Hong Kong, and I just remember sort of applying and putting my portfolio together and thinking like, God, I hope I get this. Like, I kind of put all my eggs in one basket. I think I only applied for the Hong Kong internship, and I was thinking, okay, if I don't get this, I'm gonna have to like pull something out of my ass, you know. I'm gonna have to come up with something else for the year. And yeah, I did an interview, and they took ages to get back to us, and the whole time I was like, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do if I don't get this? You know, time was sort of running out for me to come up with a plan for the year. And then yeah, they eventually got back to me, and I got it with one other girl, Alice, who is still one of my best friends to this day. She runs Rose Knitwear, and we ended up getting it together and moving out there together in the August of 2013, so like 10 years ago now. And yeah, it was just like the most excited I've ever been. I was so happy. It was like, at that point, I'd built it up to be such a huge thing in my mind. It was like all I'd wanted to do. It was like the key pinnacle of my life at that point. And I was just super happy to go out there and yeah, just get working and have this amazing experience halfway across the world. I'd never been to Hong Kong before, which looking back is like, that is so bold. Like this little 21-year-old, I would have been like, yeah, 20, 21 at the time. And like, how bold is that to just be like, oh, I'm gonna pack up and move halfway across the world for a year, having never been there before and not knowing what to expect. Like, at this point, I don't think I'd been further than like Turkey on like a family holiday. But that's like the kind of thing you do when you're that age, right? You don't realize how bold you're being. You just go for it. So I just did it, and yeah, I flew out August 2013. I remember like getting off the plane and just being like, like a hot wet slap to the face, because like Hong Kong in August is so hot, so humid. It gets up to like 100% humidity, you know. It's crazy. I'd never felt anything like that before. And I was like, damn, okay, this is it, right? Like, this is Hong Kong. And yeah, it's like so overwhelming. I think for the first few weeks I was there, I just walked around like this, like looking at all the buildings, all the skyscrapers. Because I'd grown up in like this little town in the middle of the UK. Like, it was so crazy to me to like be surrounded by skyscrapers and, you know, be in this amazing new city. It was just the best. It was like the best feeling. It was so much fun. You just felt like anything was possible. It was so cool. And yeah, I got to live with Alice. We had a little apartment together in Wan Chai, which was super fun. We just had the best time. Like, we just vowed to just have such a fun year, just exploring everything, just being total tourists in the city. We wanted to do everything we possibly could. Yeah, we just had like the best time exploring every little part of the city. The job at Brilliant Global was, it was an experience. Like, I think looking back, I was so young, I didn't really know any different, so I didn't realize um quite how bad it was at the time. Like, I'd never had anybody speak to me that way, and I maybe thought that that was just like what you could expect in fashion. um you know, kind of the stories like make my toes curl now, like the way that our boss spoke to us. Ooh. She asked me at one point if I was disabled because I'd made a few mistakes on like some CADs, if I needed to go to the hospital, if I had a problem with my eyes, which is like, wow, I kind of can't believe that somebody was allowed to speak to us that way, and I kind of can't believe that I felt it was normal. um, but hey, youth and inexperience is a hell of a drug, and I stayed in that job for a whole year, you know, kind of not thinking anything was up. And then it was only really until I got my first proper job after that that I realized, like, wow, just how messed up it had been. But you know, it's all an experience. I'm thankful that I got the chance to go to Hong Kong for the year, and you know, at least it wasn't like an unpaid internship, because I know a lot of people bust their asses for like no money, and at least I was like getting paid. But yeah, wow, it was like incredibly stressful. Looking back, it was a really tough time. Like, I didn't really sleep, I wasn't really eating properly because we would work such long days that by the time you'd get home, you'd just be like so wired that you couldn't fall asleep, and we didn't really have time to like cook proper meals and eat properly, so we'd just be living off like sandwiches and instant noodles and stuff. Because by the time you got home, you just wanted to like eat something and then go to sleep. It was, yeah, it was a wild year. But hey, it 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 gave me an experience. I don't even want to be like, oh, it gave me a work ethic, because that's not even like the work ethic that I want to have. Like, I'm not on that grind. I'm not the kind of person that can like do 14, 16-hour days. Like, I'm the kind of person who wants to like live a slow life and just do what I need to do to get by. So maybe it taught me that about myself. Maybe I realized like, oh, this isn't what I actually want. But I left that year thinking, I do still want to work in knitwear. I do love designing, but I don't want to do it in that way for that type of company, right? And yeah, I just knew that I wanted to go back to Hong Kong because I just had the best year. It was so much fun. I loved like the community there. I loved the lifestyle. And I just wanted to like explore and like be away from home and have the world opened up to me, right? So I came back, I finished my final year of university, and I just knew that I wanted to go back. So before I'd even graduated, I started like applying for jobs with companies in Hong Kong, you know, sort of presenting myself as a graduate designer. I'd put together, you know, a pretty good portfolio of not only like the more creative, high fashion stuff that I was doing on my degree, but the sort of industry led stuff that I'd done on my internship, the sort of mass market things that companies also want to see to show your versatility. So yeah, I'd put together like a pretty good portfolio, pretty good CV with that year of experience on. And I applied to like a few companies, and I ended up sort of talking to a supplier out there that wanted to hire a graduate designer. So I got pretty lucky. The timing was right, and they really liked what I had done. They liked my experience. And yeah, this sort of September after I graduated, I ended up moving back. So that would have been 2015 at that point. And I started a job at this supplier, and we worked for American companies. So I was designing for like Macy's, Kohl's, and weirdly we did a lot of stuff for QVC. So it was a much more like mass market American customer. It was like a little bit older than what I'd been used to designing for, because on my internship I was more designing for like younger, you know, teens, early 20s, that sort of customer. And now I was designing for probably like 35 plus, which, you know, it was fine. It was a bit of a learning curve, but it was fine. And the day-to-day was mainly just like, you know, talking with customers, seeing if they had any requests. I'd put together trends and mood boards to show to customers. I did a lot of CADs on Illustrator to sort of CAD up the collection, to show people what we were thinking, the sort of design direction we were going in, and also putting together tech packs for the factory, which are like specifications of all of the information that they would need to make a sample. So all of the stitch information, all of the measurements, all of the yarn information. I was responsible for all of that. And I had an assistant that would help me with some of the admin of sort of putting that together and sending it off to the factory. And of course there was always difficulties as like a non-Cantonese speaker working in Hong Kong. Our factory was over the border in China. And most of the people who worked there only spoke Cantonese. So there was always like a language barrier, and my assistant would try to translate, or the people in the factory that spoke English would try to translate. So that was like an added layer of difficulty. And, you know, I tried to learn as much Cantonese as possible while I was there, but that is a hard language to learn. That is like 9 tones. And it was difficult for me. Like, I am not a languages person. I found it really tough. But, you know, I learned enough to, like, get by. And, yeah, after about 18 months working at that first job, I had the opportunity through somebody that I'd been freelancing for on the side, sort of introduced me to another supplier, who supplied to British customers. So it was ASOS, River Island, who else? Topshop at the time when Topshop existed, Topman, and Monsoon. So it was like all of these customers that I knew really well and that I shopped at and that I'd, you know, known this whole time from living in the UK and just like shopping on the high street. So I'd sort of got to the point at my first job where I felt like I'd reached, you know, the ceiling of what I could possibly do, because they only really needed one designer, and, you know, there was no route for progression or to get any new experience, and that American customer was kind of difficult for me. So when it came to get the opportunity to work for somebody who was working with like English customers. Like, it was a no-brainer. I was like, oh, I would love to design for ASOS. I would love to design for Topshop. Like, that's my demographic, right? That's what I want to be designing. So I had an interview with this sort of contact, and he really liked what I did. And yeah, I just did a bit of a switcheroo. I handed in my notice at my first job and started at this new job like a month later. And that's where I stayed for nearly 5 years, for the rest of my time in Hong Kong. I think it might have been just over 5 years, actually. Yeah, I'd have started there 2016. Yeah, no, it was nearly 5 years. I just started there in early 2016, and I left in 2020. And yeah, that was fantastic. That was much more my speed in terms of design, because I love designing for ASOS and Topshop, River Island, that like fun high street fast fashion customer. I found it like really energizing and really interesting. There was always something new and a new trend to sort of go with and do something with. And the job itself was pretty much the same, but just for a different customer. I'd be like putting together trends, doing lots of sort of shop research, because all of the customers in the UK wanted to sort of see what the shops were like in Hong Kong, and sort of get inspiration from that. So a big part of my job was just genuinely shopping and sending shop reports to our customers. And then I was also in charge of sort of yarn direction, trend direction, putting together the in-house collection for this supplier. And all sorts of different market levels. Like, some of the things I would design would be like really simple, really commercial, but then also showing the capabilities of the factory with things that were like really technique driven and showed a lot of expertise, and were just like more inspirational. So it was really fun being able to get to do a little bit of everything. I look back on that as like a really fun time in my career, and I got to work with some really amazing people. Like, my boss was great, the team there was great, and all of the teams at like the customers, like ASOS, was so much fun to work with. Like, we had some really fun like after work times, like getting a little bit too drunk as well, which the American QVC customers didn't really ever do that. Not surprisingly. So yeah, that was sort of the next kind of 5 years of my career, up until things started to deteriorate. As I'm sure you've seen in the news with Hong Kong, things slowly started to go downhill with obviously the protests, which I fully support, protests against the national security bill that was introduced. And if you're not familiar, the national security bill was just a bill that the government introduced that meant that any criticism of the government was essentially outlawed. So any protest was outlawed, any sort of free speech was outlawed with this bill. Excuse me. Which is just, incredibly sad, and it's like a complex political issue that I won't get into here because I'm not an expert, but it sort of meant that the lifestyle in Hong Kong suddenly became very precarious, because you don't want to be breaking any laws. You don't want to be the example that's held up when it comes to protesting, and especially being like a foreigner in that country. It suddenly became, kind of dangerous. You started thinking like, oh my gosh, am I going to be the one who's like made an example of if I'm seen at a protest? It was horrible, and I truly, like, my heart goes out to like the people of Hong Kong who have had to deal with that in their home country. It's a really terrible situation. I was fortunate enough to be able to leave and come back to my home country, but there's people there who've grown up there their whole lives with like freedom of speech and basic law, and they're seeing it now become essentially an authoritarian state. So it got to the point with the protests where it got so bad that I just thought I need to come up with an exit plan, because this is going to get, you know, exponentially worse, and I don't want to stick around to see it. So probably towards the end of 2019, I started coming up with like a plan for what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And you know, I'd started to get perhaps a little bit jaded with fast fashion by that point. I was maybe a little bit burnt out, because it is just, you know, a constant need to be creative and to come up with new ideas and to constantly be inspired and new, you know. And it was getting a little bit exhausting, and after 5 years of that, I was just out of like creative energy. I just didn't have anything else left to give. So yeah, I just felt like I needed a break. I just needed to do something different. So I decided at that point that I was going to go back to the UK and finally do my master's. It'd always been something I'd wanted to do, and I just kept putting it off and kept putting it off. And I remember my lecturer from Nottingham Trent, who'd sort of taken me for my undergrad studies, she was messaging me sort of like, you know, are you going to come back? Like, it would be really great to see you, no pressure, but I feel like you'd be a really great candidate for this master's. Like, you know, think about it. And I was always like, yeah, I'd love that. Eventually, maybe next year. And, you know, 5 years later, I was like, maybe it's time to actually do that. You know, I don't think I can put it off for a 6th year. Because, you know, by this point, I was like 27, and I was thinking, maybe it's time for me to start, you know, properly planning out my future and thinking about what I really want to do for the long term. And I felt like the master's was going to be the right way for me to go, because, you know, I'd always had aspirations to maybe go back to university and lecture and, you know, do something a little bit more academic. I really enjoyed like the research side of my degree as well as the more practical design side. And I just felt like maybe that would be something that I would like to focus more on if I was gonna go back to the UK long term and sort of think about a plan for life. So I was steering more towards academia and thinking, let's go do this master's. But yeah, I'd planned to like hand in my notice at my job in the January of 2020 and then have a beautiful summer of traveling around Asia and start my master's in September of 2020. And you know, for whatever reason, I can't even remember, but that didn't work out, and I had to go back to the UK and lock down with my mum over the summer, which was fine. Like, it was not exactly what I wanted to do, but we had a nice enough time. It was cute. My mum lives in like rural North Yorkshire, so, you know, we could still like sit in the garden and go for lovely long walks, and it didn't feel terrible most of the time. So yeah, I found over lockdown that I was just knitting a lot more. I hadn't really had time or inclination to do a whole lot of hand knitting over the last 5 years of just sort of like designing knitwear all day, every day. And I didn't want to like come home and also design my own knitwear, you know, I'd had enough knitting. So yeah, I didn't really do a whole lot of knitting for like maybe 5-6 years. And it really took me sort of being at home and having that lockdown time to just think like, oh, I actually have some space and some inclination finally to do some of my own creative work rather than doing it for a company on a company's timeline, right? And that was really beautiful for me to just have some space for once to just do my own thing, and feel like I didn't have the pressure and the constrictions of like doing it for a fast fashion company. And that's kind of when the Knit Edit was born. That's when I sort of released my first patterns. I ended up just knitting a few pieces and posting them on my Instagram. Like the Knit Edit as an Instagram account. Oh my gosh, I've been talking for so long. I'm like losing my voice a little bit. Sorry, guys. Sorry if I'm sounding like croaky and sultry. But yeah, the Knit Edit Instagram account had kind of been up and running for like 3 years already at that point, because I just had it as a little side Instagram account that I liked to post my inspirational images on. Because I had so many like images that I'd saved from editorials, fashion shows, whatever it might be, as like mood board inspiration and like design inspiration for my job. That I was like, these are cool. Like I'll just set up a little Instagram account for them on the side as like a little creative outlet, and that had always been really fun, and I love doing that. Like if you scroll back to the bottom of my account, you'll still be able to see like when I was just posting like fun knitwear editorials and like fun street style pictures that I liked. Yeah, if you can be bothered to scroll back like years. But it's all still there. Like, yeah, so the account had been like up and running, and I think I'd sort of amassed maybe like 12, 13,000 followers just from doing like inspirational knitwear images. And yeah, I sort of pivoted once I got home to posting my own designs. I was like, why not? Like I have this little captive audience. I have people that are interested in my vision and the things that I like and what I do. Maybe they'd also be interested in seeing my own work, And I think it was like perfect timing, because everybody had time to knit during lockdown. Everybody learnt to knit if they didn't already know how, and everybody had all of this time. So it's probably like pretty good timing to release a pattern and finally do my own thing. And I guess, the Knit Edit was born out of that, out of me just being sort of home over the summer before my master's started, just locked down, and like, oh my god, I'd never designed a pattern before. Like I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I had to like message Alice, my intern friend from Hong Kong, and she'd also been working at Wool and the Gang for quite a few years, and I remember messaging her and being like, do you have any idea how to grade a pattern? Like, what do I do? How do I sort of make this pattern come to life? But I taught myself, I did the thing, and here we are. I just kind of kept it going. I had no idea that I would ever want to start my own business. I thought I was just gonna like do my master's and find a lecturing job or something, or like go on to do a PhD, and now here we are. I kind of created my own business out of nothing. Love that for me. So yeah, the Knit Edit has now been going for like 3 years. I absolutely love designing. I love being able to do my own thing. I love just, being my own creative director. I don't have anybody telling me what to do. I just fully like pick up my needles and design whatever I like. And so far, like, you guys have been vibing with it, which is great. Like, thanks. And yeah, obviously at the same time I was doing my master's. My master's was more like the theoretical side of fashion. It was studying, fashion theories, the theories of trend, the history of fashion, more like the sort of academic side of fashion, which I absolutely loved, and I love the opportunity to just like really dive into all of that geeky side of myself. and launch myself into all of that research and writing. I ended up writing my thesis on sort of gender expression through fingernails. If you guys have been following me for a while, like you might have seen me post about it and sort of ask people for their survey responses. I was sort of, reaching out to people over the knitedit to take part in my research as well, which was really fun. And yeah, I graduated the summer of 2021. Don't get me wrong, it was super hard doing a master's while we were still sort of going through lockdowns. We did most of our courses online, which, that's really tough. It's not as fun and intuitive as doing like an in-person course. But hey, I made it through and I made it work. And I was still sort of like designing alongside that. I was doing both. And I was lucky enough that when I graduated my master's, they offered me a sort of part-time lecturing position. And yeah, that's my other job now as well. I tutor final year university students through their dissertation process. So all of the fashion design, textile design, knitwear design students at Nottingham Trent, I tutor them through their final dissertation. And I also end up sort of covering when people are sick on fashion design and textile design. I'll cover a lot of extra hours because I am kind of so flexible because I work for myself. So I think the people at university are sort of like, oh, Charlie will be free, like get her into cover. So yeah, that's sort of the other side of my job when I'm not doing the knitedit. But other than that, yeah, I'm just designing patterns, I'm knitting pieces, I'm having a blast. Yeah, so I hope you found that helpful. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit more about my story and my experience. If you guys ever have any questions about like working in fashion, working in knitwear, setting up your own business, please let me know because I'd love to help anybody out if you're thinking of doing something similar to me. I'd love to like help you out with my experience. Yeah, just shoot me a message, or if you have like lots of questions, maybe I could do another video sort of answering your questions. If you would find that helpful, yeah, like let me know. I'm really looking forward to doing maybe some more podcasts, some more kind of vlogs like this. It doesn't feel super natural. I hope I feel a little bit more comfortable as I go along. Like bear with me if I'm coming across like this is the first podcast I've done, because it literally is. But yeah, like let me know what you would like to see from me, and if this is the kind of content you like, feel free to like and subscribe. Greatly appreciated. I'm not too far away from being able to monetize this channel, so if you could hit that subscribe button, help me out with getting some coin, much appreciated. Okay, yeah, thanks for watching, and yeah, shoot me a message if there's anything you want to know. Mwah. Bye guys.